objectives will take us to the
Recording has been
destination.
resumed.
Hypothesis will always give a route map, and the instrument, whatever instrument we are taking, is the vehicle. So many researchers, they buy the vehicle first, fill it with the fuel, and then start driving without knowing that what they are doing. So a questionnaire always without an objective and hypothesis is like a journey without a destination. We may have been traveling a long distance, but we may never arrive like where we want to go, and it is not going to be useful also. So the entire crux goes like this. We identify a research problem, we collect the data, we go with the literature review, we cover the research gap, we frame the objectives. With the objectives, we go with the hypothesis. Then we decide what are the instrument, like what is the instrument design, questionnaire designing. Then with the questionnaire, once it is through, we go with the data collection. And from there, we go with the data analysis. And we go with the findings and conclusions. Okay, so what are the research objectives? So research objectives are basically like a mind map. So we are going to roadmap. We are going to figure out. Let us take some interesting examples. I'll try to give some examples from varied disciplines. So first example, I'll go with psychology. So when we talk about, let us take an interesting research. Sports psychology. This research was very close to my heart, which I worked recently. So sports psychology, usually for being into sports, lot of psychology, not only physical skills, psychological skills are inevitable. So based on the literature review, 21 important psychological skills were identified. And we wanted to prove what are the skills which state has which skill, which sport, what skill is important for which sport. So here, the research objectives are to be fine-tuned so that based on that, it will be giving a clear direction. It will define the scope of the work. It will also give a proper guidance for the methodology, and it will facilitate the data analysis. So research objectives are crucial so that is the basement. With that basement, our building will become stronger and stronger and stronger. So taking another different example, let us take a medical example. So healthcare. So I want to know whether there are two different drugs being given for patients for a surgery. both the drugs are equally competent. So we want to know which drug has a better hemodynamic stability, which drug will make the patient request for rescue analgesia later stage. So which drug has a pain withstanding capacity. So there again, without an objective, we cannot take the research forward. So research objectives are clear statements. Talking about our management or commerce example, we want to know about the employee happiness. So we want to know whether a company which is focusing on CSR initiatives, whether the CSR initiative is really making the good progress, and whether the CSR initiatives are giving confidence to the employees with respect to the organization culture, and with that, whether the employee is really feeling happy. So here again, we'll have to focus on objectives, research objectives. So research objectives are always, they are clear statements. They describe what the researcher intends to achieve throughout the study. So it is going to be a roadmap, and it will provide a proper direction. It will define the scope of the work. It will exactly guide what methodology we are going to adopt. And based on the objective only, our data analysis, we will be able to focus. So in general objective is about the broad purpose of the study. When we go into the specific objective, it gives detailed steps required to achieve the general objective. Let us take an interesting example. To assess the impact of social media marketing on consumer purchasing behavior, a very easy and common example which is close to heart to many researchers. So this is a general objective. We want to know how are the purchasing behavior happening with respect to the consumers, and how to assess whether this social media marketing is impacting the consumer purchasing behavior. Especially when we are framing the objectives, when we have the keywords in proper place, it will be easy for the statistician for the data analysis. When you yourself you're going to analyze your data, it is advisable to formulate the objectives with proper keywords. For example, if I want to figure out the relationship between two variables, I can go with correlation later. So like it is like seeing a blank space and trying to construct a building or an interior thing within our mind, so that when we try to imagine everything in futuristic, it will be helpful for us in the later stage not to change. Because many of the research papers, what I have seen, when I try to help with the research thesis data analysis, when they already the questionnaire and the objectives are finalized, and when they come with the data collection, it's very difficult. It's very hard to do the data analysis part, because the objectives are not exactly formulated, because the keywords are missing. So when we try to make relationship when there are two or more study variables, we will go with correlation. When we make the keyword as relationship, when we keep it as influence or impact, then we can go with regression. When we try to say explore factors, then we can go with exploratory factor analysis, or we can identify the factors, whatever. So it's so important to formulate the objectives with proper keywords, so that in future, when we go with the data analysis, we don't have to rework. When we talk about a general objective, it is to assess the impact of social media marketing on consumer purchasing behavior. So here, what are the things we are going to assess? When we are talking in a specific way, we're going to examine usage patterns, we're going to analyze the consumer engagements, and also we're going to evaluate the purchase intentions. So when we examine usage patterns, we can say what are the types, like what are the usage things the consumer is trying to figure out. And we can also analyze in what are the social media modes that the consumer is getting engaged. So we can try to analyze what are the different types of social media platforms the consumers are trying to engage to buy their online purchases. And also we can try to evaluate the purchase intentions, whether they have the impulsive purchase behavior, or how do they purchase, what is that one factor that trigger their purchase intention. So we can have the general objective, and also we can have more specific objectives. Characteristics of a good objective, it should be very specific. It should measure, as I mentioned earlier, if we have an objective as to identify the relationship between talent acquisition and talent retention, whatever, one more variable, employee happiness or job satisfaction, then it will be, when we talk about relationship, we can measure it in terms of correlation. When I talk about the influence of online media, online marketing towards purchase intention, then we have influence, so we have regression, so we can measure it easily. So it should be measurable statistically. It should have a coherence and achievable. So many times what happens, the objective has too many jargons, and so we cannot try to figure out what really we have to do. So we have to make it achievable, and it should be relevant to the topic, and it should be time bound. So we'll have to make always our objective should focus on the SMART criteria: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So can we give some examples? A good example is to examine the influence of online reviews. So usually what we try to do for anything, when we want to book a hotel, we go with the reviews and ratings. So we want to do some purchase decisions, we go with the reviews and ratings. So this is a good example to examine the influence, to what extent these online reviews are really impacting the customer purchasing decisions. When especially we should be focusing on one particular segment. So here I took the example as university students in Chennai. So this is a good example of writing an effective objective. So we should have all the keywords here: influence. So that will take us for regression. examine or evaluate or investigate. So that will make us clear what are we going to do, and we should have our either we should have our all the independent variables when we are talking about when we want to really make correlation, or when we want to make regression or something in structural equation modeling, we'll have to talk about the independent variable and the dependent variable. Let me explain about those independent variable, dependent variable in the future slides. So a simple poor example is to study online reviews. So that gives a very vague picture. It doesn't add clarity like what we are going to do after studying the online reviews. What is the reason? What is the purpose for our purpose for our objective to study the online review? So we have a lot of questions unanswered. It is so ambiguous. So when we try to give an effective objective, it will help us to sail through the entire research. We'll have more clarity in this starting stage itself. Usually what we try to do, many errors, as I mentioned, when the data is already collected with objectives and questionnaire done, when it comes for the data analysis part, I observe all these things. Objectives are too broad and the wordings are so ambiguous, it gives a lot of confusion. And we don't have a proper dependent or independent variable. So our outcomes are not measured properly. And the main thing is the research problem is in the direction and this objectives are in the other direction. So alignment is not proper. And in many research, we can see that there can be 7 or 10 objectives. So too many objectives will really confuse the researcher, and we don't know, like for every objective, it should have a proper hypothesis and it should have proper variables fit in the place that will be available in the questionnaire. So for each and in fact, we can even design the questionnaire in such a way that we can post our objectives, objective 1, so that these are the sections for the objective 1 questions, statements for objective items. We can even make them as small constructs. So for objective 2, for objective 3, so like if we make it like that, it will be so clear. We will have the clarity, and even when the respondent is trying to answer, they will also not have confusion. So they will also understand how the flow of the research is going to go. So a hypothesis is a tentative statement predicting the relationship between two variables. So usually we will have either independent and dependent variable, or we have only independent variable. So it will explain us. A hypothesis is always a proposition. It's always an assumption. When we start the research, we don't know. So we have some assumption. Here again, I will have to clear some things what I was initially getting confused when I started my research. So there are two things: null hypothesis and research hypothesis. So research hypothesis will always come in the chapter 1 where we talk about the objectives. Whenever we talk about objectives, we should not talk about null hypothesis. We should talk about the research hypothesis. Research hypothesis is the assumption, what we try to understand, what we are trying to figure out, what we are trying to prove. So that is the research hypothesis. Null hypothesis will come only in the data analysis chapter. So our intention is always to reject the null hypothesis and prove the research hypothesis. So we can even make it clear that our research hypothesis will be more or less like our alternate hypothesis in the data analysis chapter. So this many times we get confused. I can see in many theses, we write objectives of the study and hypothesis of the study. There is no significant difference. There is no significant connection. So that is actually wrong. We should write a research hypothesis, what we really intend to prove, what is our assumption, what is our proposition, what is that we have figured out based on the literature review and the research gap. So that will guide the investigation further. And as I mentioned, with the keywords from the objectives, we prepare the hypothesis so that it will help us for further statistical testing. And it will also give us more focus on the research. So when we talk about hypothesis, we should, even in the objectives, it is advisable to have the independent variable and the dependent variable, or we can have only the independent variables. So whatever suits the objectives. And the objectives should have a flow. The first, it should be like a movie. The first objectives will be speaking about exploring the factors or identifying the influence or the demographic factors on the study variable. And slowly we can make the second and third objective to explore the factors. And we can go with the fourth objective, take from the independent variable to the dependent variable. What is the influence of the independent variable on the dependent variable? And the final objective, we can say that we are going to construct a model based on smart PLS or whatever, covariance based, whatever that suits the research. So this will help, the whole objectives will have a proper flow. We don't have to go back and forth. So it will take the study in an ascending order. So it will be going in a chronological order. Now talking about independent variable and dependent variable, when we construct the hypothesis, the same rule holds good. So we will either make the independent variable and the dependent variable declare in our hypothesis, and we will say whether how much it is influencing or causing. So training programs always gives employee performance. So the number of training programs are increasing, automatically the performance of the employee might get increased. So independent variable is training program. Here I know basic, like novice researchers will be always getting confused. What can be an independent variable? What can be a dependent variable? So in my opinion, which variable will disturb other variable is independent. It will not get disturbed. It will only disturb the other variable. So that is independent variable, and the variable which keeps getting disturbed by other variable. So that is the dependent variable. When we talk about training program, it is an independent variable, and it is automatically disturbs the employee performance. The more number of training programs, employee performance is increasing. If there are no training programs, performance will reduce. So this is influencing the other one. So which gets influenced is dependent variable, which is influencing others, that is independent variable. There are different types of hypotheses. So to start with, basically null hypothesis, this we will put only in the data analysis chapter. When we talk about a manuscript in a research paper, we will mention this in results and findings only, data analysis part. So we will say there is no significant relationship. Again, if we write this, there is no significant relationship between the training program and the employee performance. That is a bookish style. So when we talk in real, we cannot say there is no significant difference. And also when we write this, there is no significant difference, getting plagiarism is more. The percentage of getting plagiarism is more because no significant difference. 3 words will catch plagiarism. So better not to do like that. Instead, we can say training program does not influence employee performance. So we can make it in a simple statement. The age has no influence on the purchase behavior. Marital status has no impact on the, like that we can try to make, instead of writing there is no significant difference, we can try to make it in a slightly different way. This is null hypothesis. And again, I would like to emphasize, null hypothesis we will not write in the introduction, in methodology or introduction chapter where we mention the objectives and hypothesis of the study. We will mention null hypothesis only in the data analysis chapter, especially when we try to figure out, when we each and every when we take an objective, we write the null hypothesis and then we do the statistical tool. And then we go with the inference. We say if p-value less than, since p-value less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis. Hence, age has influence. So here our intention should be always to reject the null hypothesis, because null hypothesis, we assume that there is no problem. But actually in a research hypothesis, we say, yes, we have significantly figured out that training programs will influence. Definitely, the more the number of training programs, employee performance will increase. That is our proposed finding. That is our assumption. So in the research hypothesis, we say that there is, but here in null hypothesis, we say there is no. So it is our duty. It will be nice if the result is favorable, that null hypothesis is rejected. So as a researcher, our aim should be that if the data is more credible and reliable, it will help us to reject the null hypothesis. Talking about alternative hypothesis, again in some thesis, I can see people are writing null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis both. But in any matured papers or matured thesis, we don't see alternative hypothesis. So we will say a significant relationship exists. That is a regular standard statement, but we will not use these alternate hypotheses in our writing, in our thesis writing usually. So when we talk about an example of null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis, social media marketing does not influence purchase decision. This is null hypothesis. Alternate hypothesis, social media marketing influences purchase decision. Again, I would like to mention a small thing what I have observed in good research papers. There is no accepting null hypothesis or accepting alternate hypothesis. Either we reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Any proper research paper will use these terms only. Since p-value is less than 0.05, null hypothesis is rejected. This can be a statement. In case p-value is more than 0.05, since p is greater than 0.05, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. There is no accepting null hypothesis or accepting alternate hypothesis. Either reject null hypothesis or fail to reject null hypothesis. There are some more things. Directional versus non-directional hypothesis. So directional predicts direction of the relationship. So higher customer satisfaction leads to greater loyalty. So we can see a direction. Non-directional this predicts only. It just says there is a relationship, but it will not say which direction. Customer satisfaction is related to customer loyalty. Here we can go with correlation, but there we can go with regression. So when it is directional, we will go with regression. So it will help us to decide what statistical tool in future we are going to use. We can what is the chance of statistical tool we can apply. So directional and non-directional. Non-directional usually when this is with this example, customer satisfaction is related to customer loyalty. When I have this hypothesis, automatically I will go with correlation, not with regression, because we're going to prove some relationship. Okay, now how do I prepare an hypothesis? How do I really formulate a hypothesis? So first thing, for everything, we will start with reviewing the literature. So even when we want to write a thesis or when we write a manuscript also, we will not first go with the introduction part. We will first take review of literature. So we collect as many papers as possible in the topic of our study. We will collect the reviews. We will try to write the reviews. Is preferably if we write in an Excel format, it will be better initially, instead of like seeing the abstract and trying to copy and paste and rephrase. That will not help us in the long run. It will create a lot of chaos during the submission. Assuming even a manuscript or for a high level of Scopus, or even in our thesis, when we try to just copy the abstract and use some Quillbot or whatever software and rephrase and write, we will get caught with plagiarism and AI. So submission, it becomes a headache. That time, when we try to rephrase, the whole crux of the thesis is lost. The whole thesis, the meaning of the whole thesis gets spoiled, and the real juice of the essence of our thesis is being lost. So it will be always advisable when we try to write the literature review, we will put or collect all the important points. We go through a paper, quickly pick up whatever we want. We pick up the variables, we quickly pick up the findings, we pick up the sample size, pick up the research methodology, with research design part, and then with this we write on our own. So that will help us to evade plagiarism easily. And because we write it on our own, we don't even have AI. And then when we try to write the review, it is easy for us to identify the variables. Once we identify the variables, we will try to establish the theoretical part. And we always, with that, we will try to figure out the relationships, whether it is going to be non-directional or it is going to be directional. From there, we go with our propositions, our assumptions, which we are going to test later. So we are going to develop some statements which can be tested at the later stage. So this is the order. Go with the literature review. From the literature review, pick some interesting variables. In fact, with that, we can make a conceptual model, beautiful conceptual model. Because we are conceiving this model, this will help us even to do our structural equation modeling, and that will help us to, that will become the core thing of our whole research. So we will establish the theoretical basis with that. Our theoretical framework we will try to establish, and from there on, with the theoretical framework, we will go with the relationships. We will formulate the relationships. We will bring the mediating variable, moderating variable, everything here. From there, we develop the testable statements. So some examples of research hypothesis. When I talk about education perspective, it is e-learning positively affects academic performance. So this can be one interesting research hypothesis. So e-learning positively affects academic performance, especially in the modern era after COVID. We emphasize e-learning. It is easy for everybody. We got adapted to e-learning. Now, when I talk about healthcare, physical activity reduces stress level. So this can be a research hypothesis from the dimension of healthcare. When I talk about a business perspective, I can say employee engagement improves productivity. This is again an interesting example of research hypothesis from a business side. Okay. The instrument design. What do we really mean about instrument design? So we have with here, we need a lot of time to talk about instrument design, because for qualitative it is something different, for quantitative it is something different, and now the real trend is now mixed method, and people are even submitting their thesis only with qualitative research. So with only 19, recently I had an opportunity to work with the South African University, wherein only 19 samples, the questions were open-ended, and it was circulated about the banking frauds. So only the senior most officials in banks, they were the respondents. So it was hard to collect more number of responses. So with only 19 people collecting the data, the legal things and the fraudulent things happening in the bank. So the thematic analysis was done, and the whole research, the whole thesis, doctorate thesis was done only with qualitative research, applying NVO software and Atlas.ai. So here the instrument design refers to the systematic development of the tool. So whatever way we collect, it can be either through questionnaire, it can be through some interview schedules, even through observation checklist, or even through rating scales. So it all depends on the researcher and the modus operandi, how they are going to take it forward, and the demand of the study and the basics, how the research is being going to take it forward. How we are going to take it forward, based on that, these are the common instruments. So how to really design, what is the process of designing the instrument? So definitely one thing what I request is, our objectives, our hypothesis should go hand in hand with our instrument design. If we are making it as a questionnaire, definitely each and every objective should have something in the questionnaire, so that we can try to bring some statistical findings. So the research objectives, based on the research objectives, we will identify the variables, and from there we will develop the items. Items in the research language, we call it item. In a normal language, we call it as statements. So we develop statements, that is called as items. So each bunch of items are called as a construct in research language. So we create constructs. Those are the variables of our study. From there, we select the scale. We want 5 scale or 7 scale. Again, there is a thumb rule, like how many participants, how many respondents, and number of in the scale. If it is 5 scale or 7 scale, depends on the number of respondents. We select the scale, and we also have expert validation. From there, we go with pilot testing, and then we go with the final instrument. So here, scale development. We cannot just like that frame some questions on our own. If it is going to be online education, we cannot ask, I really enjoy my online education, strongly agree to strongly disagree. We cannot ask, as a researcher, it is not my wish to ask my own questions. Either I have to use a standardized scale, or I have to use I have to bring the scale development. I have to prove the scale development. Whichever question I'm picking up from any review of literature, I should give the credit. And I would suggest this in a research methodology chapter. It is always advisable to have a scale development. The whole, each and every item you can mention, and you can say from which paper you have picked this statement. So that will help the researcher to understand that the statements are all not vague, and there is a proper measurement made for preparing the statements, the items, and it will also give an expert validation. So because all we have taken from proven papers, so it will give so much validity. The questionnaire will have so much weightage. And after that, we go with the pilot testing. The very purpose of pilot testing is only to understand whether the questionnaire has really reached the respondent the way how the researcher has formulated, or it has been perceived in a different tone. Because in any writing, even for that matter, when we make unofficial WhatsApp conversations, the way how I perceive only, I will try to read the sentence what the other person has sent. So here, only through pilot testing, when we prove the Cronbach alpha is more than 0.6 or 0.7, we will understand that the questionnaire is reliable and it is valid. So when these items which are having less than 0.6, we will try to remove those statements from the questionnaire and make the questionnaire more reliable. So reliability and validity are important, and that will be taken only through the pilot testing. And after all these things, we will have the final instrument. So the very purpose of pilot testing is to remove the unwanted, like the questions which are all not that really useful, that it has really reached the respondents. So we have a pilot testing. We pre-test, we usually statistically 30 is a magic number, or more than 30. I would suggest, if you are having a sample size of 500 plus in your thesis, it is better to have more than 50 as your pilot study. So sample size for your pilot study. So based on the pilot testing, based on the Cronbach alpha and the validity instruments, with that we will go with the final instrument, wherein the redundant questions can be removed, and the final instrument will be the questionnaire which is revised after omitting all these I can't say unwanted, which questions are not really reachable to the audience. So when we try to design a questionnaire, these are the important points what we have to remember in our mind. One is clarity. We should make the questions simple and clear so that the respondents will be, because it's not easy to sit and answer even for a 5 minute. When I try to fill in the questions, even if it takes 5 minutes, I don't have the patience as a respondent. So I'll have to imagine everybody I have to imagine myself in their place. I have to put myself in their shoes and see. So if it is not clear, they will just tick something and go, which will again impact our data analysis. So clarity is important. The questionnaire should be simple as possible, and there should be proper relevance. It should match the questionnaire. It should match the objective, and it should be neutral. We cannot try to make the audience or respondents bring the answer. We cannot force them to. It should be neutral, and there should be some logical sequence. And it is important. I can always see in many questionnaire there is no open-ended question. So a simple tip here: when you prepare a questionnaire, if you have 1 or 2 open-ended questions, it will be helpful for you to write your suggestion chapter. So when we want to write the suggestions, whatever open-ended statements they give, that you can pick everything from all the respondents. We can try to write the suggestions for all the stakeholders, and from the respondents' perspective, we can try to understand, and we can try to use these as hints to write the suggestion chapter. And one more thing is, the respondents will have the freedom to answer in their own tone, because all the other items, we either have strongly agree to strongly disagree, highly satisfied to highly dissatisfied. So they don't have the freedom to express their views. So when you give open-ended questions, they will be happy to express their views. And for us, it is a twin benefit that we can try to pick some important messages from here, and we can convert them in our implications or suggestions policy. We can try to give suggestions to the stakeholders based on these. And closed-ended questions, it is important to have closed-ended questions because we need to have predefined respondents for simple reason. If I want to ask age, if I make it as open-ended, so people will either, if a person is 17, he will be happy to mention as 18, or if somebody is 50, they will try to make it as 49 for their own satisfaction. So it will unnecessarily confuse the whole crux of the research. So we need closed-ended questions for the questions which are highly sensitive. So if people are not ready to give their age, so it will be better to make it predefined responses. So Likert scale, for example, we make it strongly agree to strongly disagree. So a simple example of a Likert scale, online learning enhances my academic performance. So we can make it as strongly agree to strongly disagree. Here, the neutrality is maintained, the relevance is there, the flow is there. So everything is maintained. When we talk about validity, reliability is statistically, you just run the SPSS command, you get the reliability, Cronbach alpha. That is easy. And it will also say which scale to be deleted. Which item to be deleted also, it will suggest you. So the value can be deleted. But when we talk about validity, we need three important validities in any research instrument. So content validity, construct validity, and criterion validity. So content validity is whether it is covering all the dimensions. Construct validity is whether it measures the intended concept. Criterion validity is it will check the correlation with all the established measures. So we need to focus on all these three validities. Reliability, when we talk about reliability, it is the measurement, consistency of how much we measure. There are different types of reliability: test, retest reliability, and internal consistency, and inter-rater reliability. And usually the common measure is Cronbach alpha, and it should be more than 0.7. It should be more than, less than, like greater than or equal to 0.7. That is the thumb rule. So when we go with the pilot testing, so our objectives should be, we should try to identify when we collect a small set of sample and when we run the whole statistical data analysis, we will try to figure out the ambiguities, whether there is any confusion. We will also assess the reliability part. We will also improve the clarity. We will change, we will revisit our questionnaire. And also with that, we can try to estimate our completion time. For collecting 30 to 50 samples, it took so much time. So for us, 500 samples into 10. So we can try to estimate our completion time. For this data analysis, it took so many days. So for whole data analysis, how many days it will take. So we can try to estimate our project evaluation time. We can try to figure out. So pilot testing is inevitable. It will help us to understand if there is any confusion in our research, and it will also help us to assess how much we can rely on the study, and it will also give us more clarity. What are the mistakes we did in our pilot study, that those things we will not repeat in our main study, and it will help us to understand the completion time. Usually, what are the things we make, some errors we make when we try to design the instrument? One is leading questions. So we will always have some questions which will take them to, they will be forced to take it in that direction what we want. So there are leading questions, some double-barreled questions. Sometimes it will confuse us whether this or that. We will not be able to, you can see some statements, there will be two negative things. So it will be very difficult for them to understand and answer. Ambiguous wordings, so confusing, using lot of high jargons or confusing words, and excessive length. When the statement is too lengthy, it will be not easy for any person to process the statement in their mind and try to answer. And also biased response options. So we will try to make the respondents get biased. So our options will be so biased. This is, we have to definitely match the objective, the hypothesis, and the instrument. So I have given some interesting examples. So assess customer satisfaction. So satisfaction affects loyalty. That will be my hypothesis. And the instrument will be a questionnaire. Measuring employee engagement. Here, engagement affects performance. So I'll have a survey and through a scale. Evaluate learning outcomes. Here, e-learning improves performance. So here we will use a structured questionnaire. So these are all some different types of examples what I have tried to figure out with the available easy examples which I was able to give. So now quickly let me give a revision. So our objective is like a roadmap. It will help us to understand where we stand, what we are going to do, and we'll have to understand. We'll have to take. It will take us to the destination. Our hypothesis is a route map, and it will take us forward. Our instrument is the vehicle, and the data is the fuel. So usually, what will happen is a questionnaire. We'll have to make the objective, the hypothesis, and then we take the questionnaire forward. So we identify the research problem, we go with the literature review. From there, we identify the research gap, we frame our objectives, then we go with the hypothesis, then we pick our instrument design. Then after the design is finalized, we go with the data collection, data analysis, and with that we give our findings and conclusion. So objectives are important. Objectives are clear statements that will describe the researcher what is really their intention to achieve throughout this study. So it will give a proper direction. It will define the scope. It will also take us to the methodology, and it will help us in the data analysis. So usually we have general objective and specific objectives. And our objective should be always measurable and achievable. When the objectives are too broad or it is not clear, when the outcomes are not measured, it will confuse the researcher. Hypothesis is a statement, is a proposition. For example, in chemistry, if I take one chemical and the other chemical, I might land into a new chemical. So that is my tentative statement. I propose maybe this and this will give this. I have an assumption. So that is a hypothesis. So it is a proposition. So it will trigger the researcher for further investigation. It will facilitate statistical testing, and it will provide focus to the research. So it cause an influencing. So we will have independent variable and the dependent variable in any hypothesis. So we have different types of hypothesis: null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis, directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis. So how do we develop hypothesis? Based on the review of literature, we identify variables, we establish a theoretical framework, we formulate the relationships within the variables, and we develop testable statements. So instrument design is after formulating the hypothesis, we start creating a questionnaire or an interview schedule based on what we are going to collect the data, and we are going to prove the entire research or assumption. Whatever model we have conceived, we are going to figure out and we are going to prove the conceptual model. So we frame the research objective, we identify the variables or the constructs, we develop the items or the statements, we select the scale, we also go with the expert validation, we make the pre-test or pilot testing. With that, we go with the final instrument. So here we should focus on 5 important things. We should make the questionnaire or the instrument design very clear. It should be simple. It should be relevant to the study. It should be neutral always, and there should be a logical sequence. And we should remember to have 1 or 2 open-ended questions so that it will be helpful for us to write the suggestion chapter, and closed-ended questions for predefined responses, and also Likert scale is important. So content validity, construct validity, and criterion validity are the important things when we talk about the pilot study. And reliability, we talk about internal consistency, and the common measure of reliability is Cronbach alpha. And when we go with the pilot testing, it will help us to understand the ambiguity of the study, the difficulty of the study, the estimated completion, and also it will help us to improve the clarity. So the key takeaways: objectives will define what we want to achieve. Hypothesis will define what to test. Instruments will define how to collect the data. Validity and reliability will ensure quality, and pilot testing will improve the effectiveness. So with this, I conclude my presentation. A good research begins with clear objectives, meaningful hypotheses, and robust instruments. This is my key takeaway. So with this, I conclude my session, and I'm ready to take any questions, or we can also have any discussions.
Thank you, ma'am. Participants, if you have any questions, kindly raise your hands, or you can type in QA.
Dear participants, you can also post your questions.
If you have any questions, please type in Q&A.
How many hypotheses? Somebody has posted a question. In general, Bhagyalakshmi ma'am. In general, how many hypotheses is framed for each objective, madam? In my opinion, what I practice is for one objective, I formulate one research hypothesis. You can have number of null hypotheses, because if I have general one objective is to have the to study the influence of demographic factors on the online or shopping behavior. If that is my statement and that is my objective, again I repeat, to study the influence of demographic factors on the online shopping behavior. So here I have a lot of demographic factors. I have age, one demographic factor. I have gender, marital status, area of living, so many. So I will have a lot of null hypotheses in the data analysis chapter. When I go with t-test, because when I talk about marital status, if I have only single and married, two conditions, two subvariables, I will go with independent sample t-test. There I'll have one null hypothesis. Again, when I talk about education, whether education is influencing, there I will have another null hypothesis when I go with one way ANOVA. So I'll have more when I talk about something like type of social media platform and purchase behavior. I'll go with chi-square. Again, I'll have one more null hypothesis. So in the data analysis chapter, I can have more number of null hypotheses for one objective. But in the research hypothesis for one particular objective, I will prefer to have only one hypothesis. I will simply say demographic factors influence the online shopping behavior. That will be my one statement. Any more questions?
Ma'am, can you please hear me?
Ma'am, can you hear?
Dear organizers, so over to you. I thank all the participants for your patience listening, and I thank the organizers for providing me such a wonderful opportunity today.
On behalf of our department, I am glad to propose vote of thanks. I sincerely thank our resource person for sharing your valuable knowledge and insights with us. The practical knowledge and expertise shared today will certainly benefit all the participants. I would also extend my thanks to all the participants for your presence, involvement throughout this PDP. Thank you all. Dear participants, attendance and feedback link will be shared in Q&A. Kindly.
Questions are not audible for me.
Ma'am, they will post only in Q&A, ma'am. Ma'am, am I audible?
Can you explain one thing about content validity and construct validity? Can you give tips for preparing a conceptual framework model? Yeah. Let me go from the reverse. So preparing a conceptual framework model. So what I will try to do is, I will first, from the research, from the review of literature, I will pick the variables which are interesting for me, which are inquisitive. So